Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another exciting propaganda review with me, your host Imperial Dane, a master of reviewing stuff. We're covering today Xcom 2. Of course, we've already got a bit of a series going there, sort of getting more acquainted with the game, but overall, having played it, I think a sufficient amount there. I think I'd sort of, make a sort of proper review of the game. Xcom 2, of course, the follow-up or sequel to Xcom Enemy Unknown, which itself is sort of a remake or reboot or whatever you call it, of Xcom Enemy Unknown, which was released many years ago. But with the second Xcom Enemy Unknown rather sort of doing things its own way, much smaller squads for starters. Whereas in the first one, there was really sort of large units, a lot of things that have been changed, how the enemy set up. There were a lot of sort of changes then. For example, the first one also had a lot more, how should we say, predictable maps. They're pretty much all the same sets, and in that sense, we already got one of the bigger changes of XCOM 2, which is randomized maps. They're usually sort of made up of different segments, which is then sort of are randomly put together for the battles, and then all will sort of just create new maps here and there. So there'll always be sort of an element you can go, oh hey, I've kind of seen this before, but perhaps not quite in the same context. So in that sense, it's a lot harder in that way, just always sort of get tired off. You just can't just figure out the maps. But again, there will always be certain patterns because they pretty much still tend to do the enemies in the same thing, which is about bunches of 3s, 2s, occasionally 4s. A usual sort of tactical dispersion. Overall, in that sense, there's never going to be that huge a surprise. Of course, there's other new elements here. There's, for example, we have here the concealment system, which operates not on all missions, but some missions. There'll be some way, basically, just the enemy already knows you're coming in, and so thusly will be prepared for your arrival. But on missions where you basically have the advantage of usually when you encounter an enemy, they'll go scatter about, get into cover, and guess all you get for finding. But with the concealment system, that doesn't happen as long as you don't get spotted. Essentially, there's 3 things that can spot you: civilians, the traitorous little bastards, and in fact, one of the first things you can actually have in these missions is actually just popping down from, say, start on a rooftop, and then you sort of get busted by a civilian tattling on you. Bastards. But as you might be noticing here, they're not reacting, they're just having a nice day. These advent chapters, which are rather sort of the new enemy. The storyline of XCOM 2 is basically, in XCOM 1, you're kind of lost, and you're lost bad. You basically got sort of stasis and used for some nasty bits there by the new aliens, who basically sort of took out Earth and sort of pretending to be all nice, though of course we know they aren't. It sort of has the Combine feel from Half-Life 2, pretending to be nice, got a few traders sort of talking for them. Not very friendly looking chaps there, and you're basically the resistance, but unlike in Half-Life 2, you don't have Gordon Freeman. Essentially, you don't have any gravity guns or big robots to sort of stamp about. But you got the sort of the rest of the scrappy resistance tropes, including one traitorous or scientist who defected away from them, and so on and so on. So in that sense, perhaps not the most original setup, but it does work quite well within the sort of mechanics of XCOM 2, which rather means instead of being on the defensive more or less most of the game, with a few exceptions, you're now on the offensive, which rather changes the nature of the game again, where concealment sort of rather works and creates some interesting tension and whatnot, but also some interesting missions where sort of attack advent facilities, maybe sort of starting up using a nice rooftop or a ridge or whatever, having snipers covering you as you advance, and then sort of taking them down one by one. They've also taken a bunch of things sort of and meshed them together, creating some newer different things. I mean, for example, you still got the classes there from the first XCOM, though from Enemy Within they really they've basically taken the mech thing and sort of made it into a suit, so more like you just temporarily give it to your men, some of the abilities there, but beyond that, there's not so much there. That is one of those smaller changes there. Abilities have sort of been meshed together, creating some newer things. Rangers have swords, and well, that's it. I think the ones that really benefit the most, especially if you all think sort of the unit sort of really stands out the most and really has sort of a larger effect in the game. It's no longer just a healer, which was, well, the previous game. It's now also a hacker, which can have an effect not just in the battle itself, but also actually have repercussions into the strategic overlay of the battle as well, which rather changes things up quite severely. which of course is quite interesting. but at the same time, none of the other classes really have the same level. I mean, the Grenadier is basically just the heavy guy with the grenade launcher, and you got the, oh, what the devil is he now? Sharpshooter, who's just, he can do his stuff with his pistol, whereas everybody previously had a pistol, now he just has the pistols. In that sense, there's been some streamlining with the classes. You also got a Psionic Warrior, who's now much easier to get, which does have its own advantages as well. But beyond that, not so many changes there. Again, it's really the Specialist class which really stands out the most in that sense. I mean, really vastly stands out. Can hack robots, turn them to your side, but also, just again, the hacking element just really makes a huge difference, and really, again, just sort of merges together the different aspects of the game. The combat and the strategic level, which previously wasn't really there. I mean, you could grab some canisters, some stuff with enemy within, but that was really it. There's also been some smaller quality of life change. For example, now I can see who's actually had a promotion while you're in a battle, so you might want to be more careful with them and so on there. So that gives you a bit of extra to go on. All nice and dandy. You also got perhaps a bit more structured enemy, somewhat, or at least there's the illusion of it, but that's probably one of my bigger criticisms already there, sort of Xcom 2. That's not to say I dislike the game or think it's, less terrible, but I might be, less in awe of it than some other people. I mean, you got the Advent, which is again sort of the Combine element. Again, there's sort of the humans, traitors, genetically modified, and so on. Again, Combine was there. Yeah, sorry if that was a spoiler. But I know it seems, pretty much implicit pretty quickly, in particular since, these guys don't speak human, which tends to be a bit of a giveaway, when they don't speak the official language of any nation on Earth, unless someone's hiding something from me. And there's a bit, they have a structure. You got officers, you got some regular chaps, you got the Lancers who are bastards, and you got the Shield Bearers, and as opposed to the mech sort of feature each other. They sort of create something of a coherent core, but at the same time, that's really it. And even then, all the officer can do is, well, mark targets. There's no real cooperation between that and maybe the Shield Bearer creating shields for the enemy. Beyond that, well, that's really where it stops as well. There's no real coherence within the Advent. They're just sort of all different aliens that sort of just want to get as close to you as possible. In fact, the vast majority of the aliens will just sort of run towards you and try to beat you up in one way or the other. I mean, there's not much beyond just running towards you, trying to beat you up, which does limit a bit the perspective of the game, and sort of also limits a bit the impressiveness of it all. When Advent just, it doesn't really seem that structured. Again, they're supposed to be disciplined, they're supposed to be big, but they're not really. I mean, if we were to say compare with the Darkest Dungeon, there was sort of a more feeling of a structure between the enemies. They'd sort of work together. Some attacks would require other elements. They'd support each other, protect each other. Here, there's not really that. Again, they just feel sort of loosely connected, very loosely connected. And there's also one thing that's slightly bugging me, of course, with the XCOM 2. I mean, the randomness is still there. You can never sort of be quite sure, what's going on. For some right there, oh, hey, they just took down someone despite being, in heavy cover, and they were being quite far away. And then, of course, someone panics, and it all goes to hell, which is fair enough. I mean, that's, I suppose, part of the XCOM experience. The problem is just, well, sometimes they actually have timers on your missions, and then, of course, when things don't go your way, the game just decides to randomly punish you because, you're supposed apparently to control the numbers somehow through magic. I don't get it. And of course, for more experienced players, of course, you got all the tricks, you know what to do, and so on. But for the less experienced players, it tends to come off as a very punishing experience. Because, again, you're just being punished for stuff you're like, how am I supposed to know? And the game just sort of shrugs and just, leaves you to it. That seems to be a bit of a recurring theme at times with the game. I mean, for some period, apparently they've patched it, but, they could just shoot and see through walls, which, again, sort of hurts the tactical aspect of the game. In that sense, as the game progresses, a lot of the enemies just tend to run at you, be tough. Some of them rise up again, some clone themselves, and overall just becomes less and less tactical and just more about, vast abilities which just require you to kill them as fast as possible. And I suppose there's also one thing that sort of again goes a bit against the grain of the game, and again also the whole timer. I mean, they're supposed to want to be more aggressive, less slow Overwatch and all that, but problem is even in the first XCOM, it never really encouraged, more aggressive play, partly because if you sort of try to flank, you might always throw in someone really nasty, then you got a bigger fight against you. And that's sort of the same here now. They want you to rush in, and of course, doesn't really take any responsibility for the things that might happen because of it. It creates this slightly awkward sort of series of situations. We just sort of feel like, the game's just being an arse to you, and it's not really explaining much to you at all. Or, yeah, they drop stuff as well. Quite handy, I guess, but of course, if you throw a grenade and it kills it, might wreck it, but half the time it's like, if you don't do it at those times, you might get, into trouble, so it doesn't quite appear as much of a threat as it could be. And again, there's this slight sense of schizophrenia, where the game, it wants you to do one thing, but at the same time, it doesn't quite know how to achieve it, and just, sort of shrugs, again, not showing what to do. And again, then it throws all those enemies at you. And again, I feel does undercut some of the tactical elements and somewhat the things, XCOM 2 is trying to achieve. Or at least apparently is trying to achieve, Well, be more aggressive. If my men can't hit and they keep doing it, even with, high percentages of hitting, And those also tend to be sort of rare occasions where they actually flank and do stuff like that, because most engagements will be happening at a much series of shorter distances compared to what we got now, where it's a lot closer. And this is also pretty much the only mission where they actually do something like that. It tends to pretty much just be sort of head-on engagement. You're just sort of trying to sort out how to sort of get a decent flank on them without drawing in any more. And you just got some grenades, so try and that way not get horribly murdered. So again, it gets a bit frustrating at times, and particularly sort of just getting into the game initially, even if you played the first XCOM, because it just feels like the game is just being an absolute arse to you, and doing it just because it can get away with it, which is generally not the best feeling to have with a game. It's just doing it because it can get away with it. And again, when it then sort of throws all those sorts of enemies, again, it sort of undercuts it. So again, once you got control of it, it feels great. But when, it falls apart, and particularly in the early game, it really fall apart because you don't know how to play the steps. And again, that I think is also an important part, It just feels like that scene, in The Wizard of Oz, where they pull back the curtain and they all see this small little man sitting, going, "Don't look behind the curtain." Similarly, XCOM is kind of like, play the game like we want you to, and then when you don't, it's like, oh fuck. Because, its vision of tactical turn-based play is very, very narrow to a certain extent. Again, very much requires you to murder everything in one turn. And again, I do think that masks the experience in particular, but again, there's no real depth, no real coherence between the units. Again, the enemy, never just really seems to build up a larger picture, and thusly no larger narrative. In fact, the type of enemies you get, I think, actually depends partly on sort of your tech progression, which again is really cool, but also means sometimes you'll just be like, zoom, and you might encounter a certain type of enemy, like, hype for some time, berserkers. Oh, I counted maybe 2 battles, and there's like 5 or 7 battles with the Andromedons, which is just an absolute pain in the arse, because you kill them once, then they get back, you have to kill them again, and they usually get, even if you kill them during the turn, they'll get another turn with it, so, and particularly new to it, it just ends up being so absolutely infuriatingly punishing for no good reason. And again, that's sort of it. So while it is a lot of fun, I've played a lot of XCOM 2, it's not that, but I have to say, I kind of wish there was a bit more depth to it to a certain extent. There is some, and it depends, of course, on just understanding all the elements, but it doesn't come from understanding the enemies. It's more understanding what tools you got and then just use them to kill the enemies as fast as possible. Because for the enemies, it's just, ability to just sort of bloom out into something you cannot manage them. It's less about tactics than about just more brute force. And I think, what they could have tried to do is just give you more men. And in fact, one mission they sort of do, one type, that's when you defend your own base from being attacked. You can actually end up sort of engaging really large, numbers of enemies with large amount of troops. And that's actually kind of fun, and it will probably work a lot more. In fact, that's again what the first Enemy Unknown did. It had you with large amounts of troops. That way, you know, losing one guy wasn't a complete disaster. Yet here it is, it can easily be, in particular when you only operate with like 4 guys. You know, one goes nuts and, oh dear, you're screwed. And again, I think that's a bit the problem. In some sense, they're really pushing, you know, things and trying to do some interesting stuff, but for some reason they're really deeply and conservatively stuck to the 4 to 6 man elements, despite perhaps it not working very well with the deeply random elements. It's not, again, Darkest Dungeon, which just, you know, goes, well, you know, it's fine, people die, we got plenty of here for free to take over. Here, there's a lot more, you know, keep moving, tempo, don't lose. And it does create this sense of frustration, you know, at times, even when you've sort of gone into it and alright, you understand the rules of the game, you might think they're a bit, you know, dumb, but at least you get them. So again, I think that's, you know, one of the bigger criticisms. It just doesn't quite fully cohere, it just doesn't quite fully work at times. And again, very much, you know, you have to play the game the way it wants you to. Or just get, you know, just shoot it because otherwise I don't think I've gotten it yet. You know, use lots of flashbangs, medikits, smoke grenades, meh, but flashbangs really so important. I mean, they might as well just give you them instead of having to build them, because they really just make it seem like, you know, optional. They aren't. In particular, you get caught in a bad position. Then, of course, you've got a sort of improved strategic map. Again, you're now on the offensive. It changed a bit of the game here in the nature. Rather than just, you know, being given stuff, you sort of have to look for some elements. And rather than you just, you know, having to react to an alien, you now sort of go and guerrilla ops, strike them, hurt them, because now they actually have things happening as well. So now there's a feel of counterplay with the advent, which, you know, really happens on the upper levels, again on the strategic, which is nice, and wish there was a bit more on the tactical level. I mean, there's, you know, they'll drop in some reinforcement, but that just, you know, something that happens no matter what to a certain extent. There's no influence beyond, you know, maybe failing a hack at a certain lamp post. It's not like, for example, you know, officer calls in reinforcement because, oh dear, we're in trouble. Again, there's... It doesn't quite, again, cohere quite as much in the tactical level as it does in the strategic level, but it's great, you know, they manage to work them together. You can sort of do things in the tactical level that affects here, and occasionally vice versa, but not as much. But again, those events, they might, you know, for example, have your enemies be tougher, or they might get, you know, venomous shots, or faceless will appear. I mean, there's, in that sense, there's a lot more going on, which, you know, again, is quite nice. And overall, in that sense, XCOM 2 does manage to build up something bigger, something greater than the first XCOM. It's not long just about building satellites, it's not about appeasing nations, it's about, you know, protecting your guys, which is with resistance, in basically just the other opposite mission of the terror missions. Now you just protect resistance areas. If you lose them, you lose the area, you have to start all the way over again there, contacting them, building it up. So it does very much make sense. I mean, again, I really think the bigger sort of success of XCOM 2 is basically this. I mean, there'll still be some sort of frustration because you still, I mean, partly you get bombarded with messages. The pacing initially is also very off. You'll just be constantly bombarded with missions. You have to do this, you have to do this, you can't skip this, you can't wait this, you have to do this now. And you're just trying to get some supplies from the little thing, you're trying to get some intelligence. And it just gets a bit annoying, really. Plus, of course, you're being bombarded with all other sorts of messages. Then you sort of get the Avatar project, which is the big thing, that's Doomsday Timer. And your notifications sort of pop up, but then so just, all of a sudden it just fills up rapidly, fast. And then you're just like, good lord, and even if you're trying to fight it, it just builds up so fast you have to strike it down until it sort of just becomes a non-thing all of a sudden. So in that sense, the pacing here, and a big also in tactical level, is off. And it also leads a bit to element of feeling just the game is a bit rushed at times, you know. I mean, it's been delayed several times, but I'm actually getting the feeling that it's because they couldn't quite get things to sort of work on the design production level. I mean, there's just these elements that don't figure up. Again, you know, pacing is off. Some of the elements, like, for example, armor, you know, there's power armor, there's plasma weapons, but they don't look like they were made by Resistance. They look like, you know, they're made by, you know, Xcom, not... you know, a bunch of scrap resistance on, like, say, the magnetic weapons, which is the next sort of tier after the stuff you start out with, and say the plated armor, which again looks nice. Also, they can't design helmets for shit. They are absolutely terrible at designing helmets. I don't know what's up with their designers, but for some reason they can't make a helmet that doesn't look like a complete sort of papier-mâché mess-up made by their nephew in the 5th grade. Which is a bit awkward, really. But again, great success, strategic level. You got intelligence, which is used to some resources by the black market, but also gain new territories. And of course, you got supplies, which is stand in for money. You got engineers, scientists. You do sort of different stuff with that. It's overall quite nice. I'm not really going to like it, but again, the pacing is off tactically. The pacing is off a bit there in a sense as well. I mean, once you sort of get the sense of the pace, it works better. But again, I do wish there was some more tactical elements to it. There was a bit more depth to it, and again, you had more troops to move about, because I think that would work better. And then you might say, of course, but you know, that perhaps makes some things working better, but then they could just change the classes, I think. I don't know. I just feel like, you know, there are some things that are missed out, and I do think the tactical levels are being undercut a bit there in particular, because it feels like they don't know what to do with it. They just sort of throw in bigger and bigger monsters with more and more health, more and more armor, and more potent abilities, but there's never really, again, since you're fighting a coherent enemy with tactics and a strategy of their own. And that hurts it a bit. That hurts it a bit. And again, undercuts the experience. So overall, I suppose I'd say, I mean, graphically the game looks great, sound-wise, you know, alright, but you keep getting bombarded by annoying messages, which quickly get repetitive, which is a bit unfortunate. But I mean, I suppose overall, XCOM 2 is a pretty good game. It's not a great game, it's a pretty good game, but with some rather consistent flaws. Again, too much RNG at times, which can hurt you for no reason, particularly inexperienced in the game. Pacing is off. There's a sense of schizophrenia to certain elements. There's not a real coherence to it as well. But again, it really managed some good things. And again, I think it does manage to sort of pull off what a proper sequel to do, which, you know, expand and improve upon certain elements in the game. And it's great, but it just still leaves some of the elements from the first game, which really needed improvement upon, not improved at all. Just stables more on it, expands in this sort of strange ways, but never really improves it, and just sort of creates a bit of a mess. So I do feel that's unfortunate. But overall, I can recommend XCOM 2, but, you know, if you're completely new to it, definitely check out some videos, perhaps mine, some others, but just try to get an idea of what you need to do, because otherwise the game will punish you very hard. And it's, you know, gonna blame you for it too, for some reason. It's very sadistic like that, in a very dumb kind of sadistic way, you know. It's not very intelligent about it, which really hurts it again compared to, say, Darkest Dungeon, which, you know, is sadistic, but it's very much telling you right off the bat, hey, this is going to hurt, but I'm letting you know. And in fact, I'm going to help you a bit letting you know about it. And again, you know, it doesn't feel like it's punishing you in a stupid way for it. So in that sense, again, you know, again, very good, but not great. Definitely some flaws, and there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, and I think they really need to figure out what they want to do tactically with the game, to be honest, because it's starting to get a bit silly when it's the second game, and you still got some of the silly stuff there, and they sort of managed to just throw more minions, but not really do anything interesting with them, when they've actually done some interesting things occasionally with some other elements, in particular the specialist stuff, which I really think is great. I wish they could do more like that, to be honest. So that really, I think, covers the review. Hopefully this has been enlightening. Hopefully this has helped you sort of make a decision on whether or not to get XCOM 2. So, thank you all, and see you another time. Bye!